Hi everyone! So today we are going to be talking about lighting techniques to improve your photography. So if you are interested on how you can improve your photography skills, keep on watching. Lighting is definitely a huge part of photography. So in this video specifically, we are going to be focusing on the topics of front lighting, side lighting, and backlighting, and when you should be using each one of those. Let's get started. Okay, so first we are going to start off with front lighting. The key and short explanation of front lighting is that it is when the subject of your image is placed so that the light is directly in front of it, illuminating only the front side of your subject, which also then brings out whatever detail is at the face of your subject. Using front lighting will make it so the shadow created by the light is directly behind your subject, making it so there aren't any shadows being specifically shown in your image. This technique is generally used when photographing an object such as a product where your photo is being used for an advertisement, a poster, or anything like that. This is so that all of the field of interest is directly targeted towards the product. Although this technique is most commonly used when photographing a product, you can also still definitely use this technique when photographing a person. The technique of front lighting can sometimes be the most common and simplest type of lighting to shoot with, but it can also be the most featureless and boring type of lighting technique. So now we are going to be talking about side lighting. This technique includes placing your light source so that it hits the side of your subject, creating shadow and depth in your image, which definitely contrasts the look of front lighting. Having this type of depth in your image can potentially increase the interest that your audience or viewers might have in your image. Because when shooting with side lighting, that light always doesn't have to be coming from a 90-degree angle. It can be coming from the lower end of your image or higher depending on where you want your shadow to fall. This technique is generally used when photographing a person or model because this is a great technique to play around with the shadow or depth of the person. This style is also a very simple style to shoot with, as long as you are continuously watching where the shadow falls and adjusting the subject as needed to create a more detailed or interesting shadow. Alright, so the last technique that we are going to be talking about today is backlighting. Backlighting is definitely one of the hardest types of lighting to work with, speaking from personal experience. Because if you don't get it right, you could end up with a photo that is out of focus or that is having a hard time focusing on your subject. But if you master it, you could end up with a beautiful silhouette or a halo type glow around your subject. When working with backlighting, it is super important to have a great understanding of shooting in manual mode on your camera because you want to have control over the exposure of your subject. This technique is mainly used when photographing a person, seeing as backlighting can be used to create a beautiful silhouette, which is where all of the light is coming from behind the subject, making it so that all the light shadows are in front of the subject, creating the silhouette effect. By adjusting your exposure, backlighting can also give portraits a nice pop and halo effect. The thing about backlighting that makes it the most tricky is that sometimes when attempting to create the halo effect of light behind the subject, it can result in overexposure of your background. To prevent this from happening, photographers often suggest to use a reflector or front flash to provide more exposure at the front of your subject, while still giving the backlight glow. Okay, so that basically brings me to the end of this video. Let's sum up what we have talked about today. We learned how the technique of front lighting is when the light is directly in front of your subject, illuminating only the front side, which helps to bring out the detail at the face of your subject. And yes, this is the simplest type of lighting to shoot with, but remember that if you're trying to create a more creative photo, perhaps look into using side lighting or backlighting instead, as it can be the most boring type and featureless type of lighting technique. Now, side lighting is the technique which includes placing the light source so that it hits the side of your subject, which creates shadow and depth, adding more interest into your image. And don't forget to utilize angles when taking the photos to add creative shadows and adjusting the subject as needed to add a more interesting or creative shadow. And finally, we talked about how backlighting is definitely a more difficult technique to work with, as it is important to have a good understanding of manual mode on your camera. If you master it, you could create a beautiful silhouette style photo or a halo effect photo by adjusting your exposure, where all of the light is directly behind the subject and the shadow falls in front. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned a little bit about lighting techniques in photography to improve your skills. Lighting is a huge important part of photography, so never be afraid to experiment with the different techniques that we talked about today. See you next time. Bye!
She's a Mona Lisa. Everyone's lining up to see her. There must be something about a feature.